The smell hit first. Sweat mixed with gun oil, and beneath that, something sharper, fear disguised as cigarette smoke. Tommy Ventrilo pressed his back against the brick wall of the tenement stairwell, feeling the dampness seep through his shirt. August in Harlem, the kind of heat that made wool suits stick to your skin and turned patience into something expensive. He counted the footsteps above him, 6 sets climbing, 6 more waiting on the street, 12 men total, all armed, all professionals, 12 men sent by Dutch Schultz to kill 1 man. Should be easy. Tommy's finger traced the grip of his revolver, slick in the humidity. 3 floors up, apartment 4C. That's where the intelligence said Bumpy Johnson would be, alone, asleep if they were lucky. The kind of clean job that'd be over in 2 minutes. But Tommy's hands were shaking. Not because he was soft. He'd done this work for 7 years, ever since leaving Jersey with a murder warrant that never quite caught up to him. He'd put down union organizers in Brooklyn, rival bootleggers in the Bronx, even a cop who got greedy in Queens. Killing didn't bother him anymore. What bothered him was the silence. Harlem was never silent. Even at 3 in the morning, there should be music bleeding from windows, voices arguing in apartments, the distant rumble of the elevated train. But right now, in this building on Lenox Avenue, Tommy could hear his own heartbeat. The building was listening. Move. That was Carlo, the crew leader, his voice a whisper that somehow carried authority. Big guy, thick neck, the kind of enforcer who solved problems with his hands before he ever reached for a gun. He gestured up the stairs with 2 fingers. They climbed. Tommy noticed things he didn't want to notice, how the 4th step from the bottom didn't creak under their weight. Someone had fixed it recently. How there were no lights in any of the hallway windows, but he could feel eyes behind the curtains. How the door to apartment 2B was open just a crack, enough to see out, not enough to be obvious. Everyone knew they were here, and nobody was calling the cops. 3rd floor landing. Carlo raised his fist. Everyone stopped. Tommy's shirt clung to his spine. From somewhere above them came the sound of water dripping, steady as a metronome. Nothing else. Something's wrong, Tommy whispered. Carlo shot him a look that said shut up or go home, but Tommy saw it in the other men's faces too. Paulie kept licking his lips. Fat Angie's trigger finger twitched against the barrel of his shotgun. Even Frankie the Snake, who supposedly gutted a man without blinking, kept glancing at the darkness behind him. They were apex predators who suddenly weren't sure what they were hunting. 4th floor. Apartment 4C sat at the end of the hallway, door painted a dark green that looked black in the dim light. A single bulb hung from the ceiling halfway down the corridor, swaying slightly though there was no breeze. It cast shadows that moved like living things. Carlo pressed his ear against the door, listening. 10 seconds. 20. He nodded to Vito, who moved forward with a crowbar. The door was unlocked. It swung open with a whisper of hinges that had been recently oiled. Beyond it, darkness. Not the darkness of sleep, but the deliberate darkness of an empty room. Tommy felt his stomach drop. Carlo went in first, gun extended. The rest followed with practiced efficiency. Tommy's eyes adjusted slowly. Studio apartment, neat, almost military in its organization. A bed with hospital corners, a small table with 1 chair. A hot plate that was still warm to the touch. Warm. Someone had been here 15 minutes ago, maybe 10. He knew, Paulie said, his voice cracking slightly. He goddamn knew we were coming. Carlo spun toward the window. It overlooked a fire escape that descended into an alley. But the window wasn't open. It was locked from the inside. Check the bathroom, Carlo ordered. Tommy moved toward the small door in the corner, his revolver raised. His reflection caught in the mirror above the sink as he pushed the door open. Just him, alone. No Bumpy Johnson crouching with a gun, no ambush. Just a note taped to the mirror. 3 words in neat handwriting. Welcome to Harlem. Boss, Tommy's voice came out hoarse. You need to see this.
But Carlo was already at the main door, staring into the hallway. Tommy followed his gaze and felt ice water replace his blood. Every door in the corridor had opened. Not violently, not dramatically, just open. 6 apartments, 6 doorways, and in each one stood a figure. Old women with arms crossed, young men with hands in their pockets, a child holding his mother's hand, all silent, all watching, none of them afraid. "We're leaving," Carlo said, "now." They moved toward the stairwell, trying to maintain discipline, trying not to run, but Tommy felt the walls closing in. The stairwell that had been empty 5 minutes ago now had people on every landing, not blocking their path, not threatening, just present, bearing witness. First floor, the front door stood open. Beyond it, Lenox Avenue stretched empty under streetlights that seemed dimmer than they should be. The 3 sedans they had arrived in were gone, not stolen, moved. Tommy could see them 3 blocks down, parked neatly in front of a church. "Walk, don't run, just walk," Carlo said. They walked. 3 blocks felt like 3 miles. Tommy's shoulder blades itched with the certainty of being watched from every window, every doorway, every shadow. But no shots came, no ambush materialized.
They reached the cars, keys still in the ignitions, nothing disturbed, except for one detail. On the hood of the lead car, held in place by a small rock, was a piece of paper. Carlo snatched it up, read it, and his face went gray. "What?" Paulie asked. "What's it say?" Carlo's hand trembled as he passed the note around. Tommy read it twice, his mind refusing to process the words at first. "I know about Vito's daughter, the fever, the hospital bills you can't pay. I know about Paulie's gambling debt, 3,000 to Morello's crew. I know Carlo skims from every job, 200 here, 300 there, adds up. I know everything Dutch knows, and I know what he doesn't. Go home. Tell him Harlem isn't for sale. Tell him 12 men came. Tell him one decision brought you all home alive." There was no signature, none needed. Tommy looked back down Lenox Avenue. The street was empty now, as if those dozens of witnesses had been ghosts, as if Harlem itself had simply exhaled and dismissed them. "Get in," Carlo said. "We're done." They drove in silence, heading back downtown toward the Bronx, where Dutch Schultz would be waiting for their report. Tommy stared out the window, watching Harlem disappear behind them, and realized something that made his chest tight. They'd been allowed to leave. Every step of this night had been choreographed. The empty apartment, the witnesses, the moved cars, the note. Bumpy Johnson hadn't just escaped a hit, he'd turned it into a demonstration, a message written in humiliation instead of blood, more effective than any ambush could have been. Because now, Dutch Schultz would know what everyone in Harlem already understood. You couldn't kill what you couldn't catch, and you couldn't catch someone who'd already won the game before you realized you were playing. Tommy touched the note in his pocket. Physical proof that they'd been played. Physical proof that Dutch Schultz's biggest weapon, fear, had just been neutralized by something more powerful. Information. The car hit a pothole, and Tommy's stomach lurched. They were heading back to report their failure, to tell one of the most dangerous men in New York that his money and his reputation couldn't buy Harlem. In the driver's seat, Carlo lit a cigarette with shaking hands. None of them spoke about what would happen next, but they all knew. You didn't embarrass Dutch Schultz and walk away. Not his enemies, and maybe not his own men either. Dutch Schultz didn't explode. That's what made it worse. Tommy stood in the back room of the Bronx Social Club, still sweating from the drive, and watched his boss read the note for the third time. The Dutchman's face remained perfectly calm, almost pleasant. He folded the paper with precise movements, creasing each edge like a man who had all the time in the world. Then he set it on fire. The paper curled and blackened in the ashtray, smoke rising in a thin column toward the ceiling. Schultz watched it burn completely before looking up at his 12 men. His eyes were the color of dirty ice. Bumpy Johnson just made me look like a chump in front of my own crew. Nobody moved. The club smelled like spilled beer and cigar ash. A clock on the wall ticked loud enough to count heartbeats. Carlo, Schultz's voice stayed soft, conversational. You left 6 men on the street as lookouts to make sure nobody surprised you. He paused. How did 3 cars get moved without any of them noticing? Carlo's throat bobbed. Boss, I don't... Shut up, Schultz interrupted. They were probably getting coffee, or maybe they were chatting with some local girls, or maybe, he leaned forward, maybe they were so scared of some colored neighborhood that they forgot how to do their damn jobs. It wasn't like that, Vito said. His voice came out stronger than Tommy expected. That whole neighborhood was in on it, every person on the street. They didn't threaten us, didn't have to. They just watched, like they knew we couldn't touch them. Schultz smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. You're telling me that Bumpy Johnson has an entire neighborhood protecting him? That some policy runner has more juice in Harlem than I do? He stood up, walking slowly around the table. That's interesting, because I own half the cops in that precinct. I own the judges who let his people out of jail. I own the warehouses where he stores his number slips. He stopped behind Tommy. He could feel the heat of his boss's breath on his neck. Or I thought I did. Schultz moved to the window, staring out at the Bronx streets where his real power lived. Shops that paid protection, speakeasies that bought his beer, politicians who took his money. This was his kingdom. Harlem was supposed to be just another territory. This note, Schultz turned back. He knows about Vito's daughter? Vito nodded miserably. And your gambling problem, Polly. Polly stared at his shoes. And you, Carlo, he knows you've been skimming. Schultz said it like he was discussing the weather, which means I know, too. Funny how that works. Carlo went white. Boss, I can explain. Shut up. Here's what I'm thinking. Bumpy Johnson just told me he's got better intelligence than I do. He knows my operation inside and out, knows my men's weaknesses, probably knows what I had for breakfast. He drummed his fingers on the table. That kind of information doesn't come cheap, and it doesn't come from nowhere. Tommy felt the implications settle over the room like a blanket soaked in gasoline. Someone was talking. Someone in Schultz's organization was feeding information to Harlem. Now I got a problem, Schultz continued. I can't let this stand. I send 12 men to do a job. They come back empty-handed with a note that makes me look weak. Every other crew in New York is going to hear about this. They're going to wonder if Dutch Schultz is losing his touch. He smiled again, cold and calculated. So we're going to fix this tonight. Carlo said carefully, Boss, maybe we should wait, plan it better. Plan better? Schultz's voice cracked like a whip. You had a plan. 12 armed men against 1. You had the address. You had the element of surprise. And you got played like a bunch of amateurs.
He stood again, pacing now, energy building. No more sneaking around, no more small teams. Bumpy Johnson wants to make this public? Fine, we go in loud. 20 men, broad daylight. We find him, we drag him into the street, and we put a bullet in his head where everyone can see. Schultz's face flushed red now, the famous temper finally breaking through. I want every person in Harlem to know what happens when you embarrass Dutch Schultz. Tommy's stomach turned. This was exactly wrong. Everything about this was wrong. You didn't win by escalating with Bumpy Johnson. The note had proven that. The man thought 3 moves ahead. He'd anticipated the first hit. He'd be ready for the second. But Tommy kept his mouth shut. You didn't question the Dutchman when he was like this. "Paulie," Schultz pointed, "you're out. Go settle your gambling debt before Morello's crew kills you and saves me the trouble. Vito, take a week. Handle your family situation. I don't need distracted soldiers." He turned to the rest. "Everyone else, we hit Harlem tomorrow afternoon, 2 o'clock, right in the middle of the day when the street's full. I want witnesses, I want fear." His eyes gleamed with something hungry. "I want Bumpy Johnson to understand he picked the wrong man to play games with." The meeting broke up. Men filed out quietly, heads down. Relief at being dismissed mixed with dread at what came next. Tommy lingered near the door, watching Schultz pour himself a drink. "Something on your mind, Tommy?" Tommy almost said no, almost walked away, but something in the note, the precision of it, the cold intelligence, made him speak. "He let us go, boss." Schultz looked up. "What?" "Bumpy Johnson. He had us. Whole neighborhood was in on it. He could have killed all 12 of us, and nobody would have said a word. Cops wouldn't have found a single witness." Tommy chose his words carefully. "But he let us walk, sent us back with a message instead." So maybe he's saying this doesn't have to be a war. Maybe nothing." Schultz drained his glass. "You know what I learned running beer during Prohibition? There's 2 ways to control territory: fear or respect. Respect takes years. Fear takes one good example." He set the glass down hard. "Bumpy Johnson's about to be my example." Tommy nodded and left. But as he walked out into the Bronx night, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were all walking towards something dark, something inevitable. He'd been in this life long enough to recognize the shape of things, the pattern. Schultz was a hammer, and he saw every problem as a nail. But Bumpy Johnson wasn't a nail. He was a mirror, and hammers shattered when they hit mirrors. Tommy thought about the note still burning in Schultz's ashtray. 3 simple lines that contained more threat than any gun. "I know everything Dutch knows, and I know what he doesn't." What didn't Schultz know? Tommy walked faster, hands in his pockets, looking over his shoulder at shadows that seemed too dark. Harlem was 15 minutes south, might as well be another country. A country where the rules were different, where information mattered more than firepower, where a single man could make 12 professional killers feel like children lost in the woods. Behind him, the social club's lights burned yellow in the darkness. Inside, Dutch Schultz was probably planning his assault, picking his men, checking his guns, doing everything right according to the old rules. But Tommy had felt those rules change the moment he stepped into that empty apartment, had felt them shatter when he read that note, had felt them disappear completely when he watched an entire neighborhood bear silent witness. Tomorrow, 20 men would go to Harlem. Tommy wondered how many would come back, and whether Dutch Schultz understood that this stopped being about territory the moment Bumpy Johnson decided to teach him a lesson instead of just killing his soldiers. The night air tasted like rain, storm coming. Tommy could feel it in his bones, the same way he could feel what came next.
Dutch Schultz was about to learn what happened when you brought a gun to a chess match, and Harlem was about to show him that some neighborhoods couldn't be conquered. They could only be respected or avoided. Schultz had just chosen option 3. 2 o'clock sunlight hit Lenox Avenue like a spotlight on a stage. Tommy sat in the back of the lead car, watching Harlem move around them with the rhythm of a normal Saturday afternoon. Kids playing stickball, women with shopping bags, old men playing checkers outside a barber shop. The storefront church on the corner had its doors open, gospel music drifting into the street. Everything looked ordinary. Everything felt wrong. 20 men in 5 cars, shotguns and Thompson submachine guns wrapped in blankets on the floor. Schultz had stayed in the Bronx. He never got his hands dirty anymore. But his instructions were clear. Find Bumpy Johnson, make it public, make it permanent. Carlo rode in the first car with Tommy and 3 others. His jaw was tight, hands gripping the steering wheel like it might escape. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the engine and the distant gospel hymn singing about deliverance. They turned onto 135th Street. That's when Tommy saw him. Bumpy Johnson stood on the corner outside Small's Paradise, the famous nightclub where Harlem's elite came to dance and deal. He wore a gray suit that probably cost more than Tommy made in a month. No gun visible, no bodyguards flanking him. Just Bumpy, smoking a cigarette, watching their cars approach with the calm expression of a man waiting for a bus. "There," Carlo breathed. "Right there. He's just standing there." The car slowed. Tommy's heart hammered against his ribs. This was too easy, too obvious. Bumpy Johnson wasn't stupid. The note had proven that. So why was he standing in the open like a target at a shooting gallery? Unless he wanted to be seen. The car stopped. Doors opened. 20 men stepped onto Lenox Avenue with weapons barely concealed. The gospel music continued from the church. The kids kept playing stickball, but the women with shopping bags had stopped walking. The old men at the checkers table had gone still. Harlem was watching again. Bumpy dropped his cigarette and crushed it under his shoe. He looked directly at Carlo. "You came back," Bumpy said. His voice carried across the street without shouting, deep and measured. "You brought more friends this time." Carlo raised his shotgun. "Dutch Schultz sends his regards." "Does he?" Bumpy smiled slightly. "And did Dutch also send you here to die? Because that's what's about to happen if you don't get back in those cars." Tommy saw Carlo's finger tighten on the trigger, saw the other men spreading out, creating a crossfire, saw Bumpy Johnson stand completely still, hands at his sides, making no move to defend himself. "You're bluffing," Carlo said. "Am I?" Bumpy tilted his head. "Look around, Carlo. Tell me what you see." Carlo didn't look, but Tommy did. The kids had stopped playing. They'd stood frozen mid-game, stickball bat held loose, watching. The women weren't running. They'd set down their shopping bags and turned toward the confrontation. The old men at the checkers table sat with their hands visible on their laps. Everyone was calm. Nobody was scared. "You see it now." Bumpy took a step forward, just one. "This is my neighborhood. These are my people, and not one of them is going to let you walk away if you pull that trigger." "They're unarmed," Carlo said, but his voice wavered. "Are they?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Tommy scanned the street again, the women's hands near their purses, the old men's positions at the checkers table, perfect lines of sight. The kids who'd stopped playing but hadn't dropped the bat. Even the gospel choir had gone quiet. The whole street was a weapon. "You made a mistake coming here," Bumpy continued, his voice never rising.
But it's not too late to fix it. Get back in your cars, drive back to the Bronx, tell Dutch Schultz that Harlem isn't for sale at any price. And if we don't, Carlo's shotgun shook slightly. Bumpy reached into his jacket. 20 guns shifted in response, but he pulled out only a photograph. He held it up so Carlo could see. That's your sister, isn't it? Maria. Lives on Morris Avenue. Works at the garment factory on Melrose. Bumpy's eyes were cold now, hard. Pretty girl. Be a shame if something happened to her. Carlo's face went white. You wouldn't? No, I wouldn't, because unlike Dutch Schultz, I don't do business that way. I'm offering you and your men a choice, the same choice I gave you 3 nights ago. Walk away or force me to do something none of us want.
Tommy felt the moment shift, felt the balance change. This wasn't about firepower. It was about will, about who believed in their position more. And Bumpy Johnson stood there like a man who'd already won, who was just waiting for everyone else to accept it. Carlo, Tommy spoke quietly, put the gun down. Shut up, Tommy. He's right, though. Look at this street. We're surrounded, not by gunmen, by witnesses. Every person here can identify us. Every person here knows who we work for. His mouth was dry. We pull these triggers and we're not killers anymore. We're just murderers in front of 100 people who'll testify. They won't talk, Carlo said, but he didn't sound sure. Won't they? Bumpy asked. You think Dutch Schultz scares these people more than I do? He's a businessman from the Bronx. I'm the man who feeds their families, who keeps the cops from breaking their doors down, who makes sure their kids can walk to school safely. He took another step forward. Fear is cheap, Carlo. Loyalty is expensive, and I've been investing in this neighborhood a lot longer than Dutch has been threatening it. A window opened above them. An old woman leaned out, looked down at the armed men, and spoke in a voice like iron. You boys need to leave now, for you do something stupid you can't take back. Another window opened, then another, faces appearing, witnesses multiplying, each one a nail in the coffin of any chance this had been a quiet operation. Carlo's shotgun drooped, just slightly, but enough. Smart man, Bumpy said. Now here's what's going to happen. You're going to get back in your cars, you're going to drive away, and you're going to deliver a message to Dutch Schultz. He pulled out a sealed envelope from his inside pocket. Give him this. Tell him it contains information about his operation that I've been collecting for 6 months. Names, dates, transactions, everything. He held out the envelope. Carlo didn't take it. Tell him, Bumpy continued, that I could have given this to the district attorney, could have ended his whole operation with one conversation, but I didn't, because I'm not interested in destroying Dutch Schultz. I'm interested in him understanding that Harlem operates by different rules. Tommy stepped forward and took the envelope. His hands didn't shake. He was past fear now, past pride. He just wanted to survive this moment and get back to the Bronx with his life intact. One more thing, Bumpy said. Tell Dutch that if he sends men after me again, the next envelope goes to the DA, along with testimony from 12 people who say they saw Dutch Schultz's men murder an unarmed man in broad daylight on Lenox Avenue. He smiled without warmth. I'm giving him a way out. I suggest he take it. Carlo finally lowered the shotgun completely. This isn't over. Yes, Bumpy said quietly. It is. You just don't know it yet. They got back in the cars. Nobody spoke during the drive back. The envelope sat on Tommy's lap like it weighed 100 pounds. He didn't open it. Didn't need to. Whatever was inside, it was enough to make Dutch Schultz understand what Tommy had already figured out. You couldn't beat someone who fought with information instead of bullets. You couldn't intimidate someone who'd already won before the fight started. You couldn't catch what you couldn't kill.
At the social club, they found Schultz exactly where they left him. Same chair, same whiskey, but his face had changed. The confident rage was gone. In its place was something harder to read: calculation, reassessment. Tommy handed him the envelope. Schultz opened it with steady hands. He read for 3 minutes without speaking. Then he set the papers down and looked at his men with eyes that had aged a decade. "Get out," he said. "All of you." They left. Tommy was the last one out. He paused at the door, looking back at one of the most dangerous men in New York City, sitting alone with proof of his vulnerability spread across the table. "Tommy," Schultz's voice stopped him. "How many came back, Tommy?" "All of us, boss." "All 20. Schultz nodded slowly. "That was his point, wasn't it? He could have killed you, all of you, but he let you walk twice, once to show he could, once to prove he would." Tommy said nothing. "You know what the biggest mistake was?" Schultz picked up one of the papers. "It wasn't sending 12 men. It wasn't sending 20. It was thinking Bumpy Johnson played the same game I do. He's not a gangster, Tommy. He's something else, something smarter." "What are you gonna do, boss?" Schultz was quiet for a long time. Then he smiled, but it was the smile of a man who'd just lost a fortune at cards and was pretending it didn't matter.
"I'm going to leave Harlem alone. I'm going to focus on my operations in the Bronx, in Queens, in Brooklyn, and I'm going to tell anyone who asks that Bumpy Johnson and I have an understanding." He poured another drink. "An understanding that he's got his territory and I've got mine, and that's just fine." Tommy nodded and left. Outside, the Bronx was getting dark. Streetlights flickered on. The city moved around him like it always did, indifferent to the small wars fought in its shadows. He walked home slowly, thinking about the moment on Lenox Avenue when he'd watched an unarmed man face down 20 killers and win without firing a shot. Thinking about the envelope full of information that was more dangerous than any gun. Thinking about the difference between fear and respect, between territory and home, between power and intelligence. Dutch Schultz had sent 12 hitmen after Bumpy Johnson. 1 returned with a message. Then 20 went back. All 20 returned with the same message written on their faces. Some men couldn't be beaten because they fought battles you didn't even know you were in until they were already over. 3 weeks later, Tommy heard through the grapevine that Dutch Schultz had been seen at Small's Paradise, sitting at the bar, sharing a drink with Bumpy Johnson, laughing like old friends. He didn't know if it was true. Didn't matter. The story itself was the point. The story that said even Dutch Schultz knew when he was outmatched. The story that traveled through every speakeasy and social club in New York. The story that made Bumpy Johnson's reputation untouchable. And somewhere in Harlem, on Lenox Avenue, life went on. Kids played stickball. Women carried shopping bags. Old men played checkers outside barbershops. The gospel choir sang about deliverance. The neighborhood that had stood as silent witnesses to power understanding its limits. The neighborhood that proved sometimes the smartest move was letting your enemy walk away so everyone could see they'd lost. Tommy never went back to Harlem, never had reason to, but sometimes late at night he'd think about that empty apartment, that note with 3 words, that moment on the corner when he realized he was part of someone else's lesson. And he'd wonder if Dutch Schultz ever really understood that the biggest mistake wasn't sending the hitmen, it was thinking Bumpy Johnson needed to be afraid in the first place. You know what's crazy? Most people think power comes from who's got the biggest gun or the most men. But stories like this, they show you the real game, the quiet moves, the chess, not the checkers. If this one got you thinking differently about what strength actually looks like, do me a favor, hit that like button. And if you know someone who needs to hear this story, someone who's always being underestimated, share it with them. Drop a comment and tell me,
Have you ever been in a situation where you had to outsmart someone instead of outfight them? I read every single one. And if you want more stories about the people who changed the game by rewriting the rules, the ones history almost forgot, subscribe. We've got a whole library of them coming your way. This is how the real ones won, and nobody's teaching this in school.